Hello friends, in this video I will present my chapter again on Shelley. I have already dealt with two topics on Shelley. In this chapter or in this video I will deal with Shelley's treatment of nature. Shelley deserves a high place among the nature poets of an age which was deeply contemplative of the beauty and mystery of nature and of the link which connected uh, man with the universe and the spirit. Like other romantic poets, Shelley loved nature with passion and sincerity and established a deep kinship with nature because nature provided him both love and sympathy which he could not find in the human world. Disgusted with human indifference, he turned towards nature and got solace and comfort in her lap. He observed in his essay on love in solitude or in that deserted state when we are surrounded by human beings and yet they sympathize not with us. We love the flowers of spring in the blue air. There is then found a secret correspondence with our heart. Nature sympathizes with human sorrow and suffering. In Adonis, we find nature as one of the sympathetic mourners over the death of kids. This we note in stanzas 14 to 16. The natural objects are too overwhelmed with grief to perform their natural functions. I quote, her eastern watchtower and her hair unbound, wet with tears which should adorn the ground, dim the aerial eyes that kindle day. After the melancholy thunder mooned, pale ocean in unquiet slumber lay, and the wild winds flew round, sobbing in their dismay. Spring appears as dismal as autumn. I quote, grief made young spring wild, and she threw down her kindling birds as if the autumn were, or their dead leaves, since her delight is flown. For whom should she have waked the sullen ear? Shelley's love of the wild and the vast in nature. I unquote. Whereas Wordsworth loved the homely and familiar aspects of nature, Shelley loved the wilder, vaster, and the unfamiliarity in nature. He became interested in her majestic, wild, and splendid aspects. He loved the desolate rocks and caves, cliffs, the fury of the storms, uh, lightning and thunder. Commenting on Shelley's love of the wild and splendid, Dawson writes, the pomp and splendor of the evening sky, the wind and the changeful glory of atmospheric effects, the terror of tempest, those rare and more awful manifestations of nature when she puts on a supernatural grandeur and seems indeed to be alive, a spirit of strength and beauty whose rainbow blinds us, whose ethereal loveliness awes and masters us, whose half dreadful charms at once inspires and subdue us. He would go, I quote, to the wild woods and the plains and the pools where winter reigns. Imagine all their roof of leaves, where the pine its garland views, of sapless green and ivy dun, round stems that kiss the sun. I unquote. In depicting these grand and glorious sights, Shelley does not care for clarity of vision. He often etherealizes nature and makes her vague, blurred, and indefinite. His descriptions are often hazy. The description of the underwater scenery in Ode to the West Wind, of boat journeys in several poems, of the flow of stream in Arethusa are misty and indistinct. The landscapes he describes therefore remain vague. They are life pageantry of mist on an autumnal stream. In Adonis, the light of the universal spirit is first that beams, then a breath that descends on him. Similarly, splendor which sits on the mouth of the dead poet and then dissolves into nothingness is not very clear. I quote, another splendor on his mouth alit, and as a dying meteor stains a wreath of moonlight vapor which the cold night clips. It flushed through his pale limbs and passed to its eclipse. I unquote. Shelley's moods and conditions decides his attitudes towards nature. Shelley's attitude towards nature was conditioned by a variety of moods. At times he pictured nature in close connection with human affection. At other times he would present her in an entirely detached and unconcerned way, like a scientist interested only in the objective analysis of the nature's beauties. For example, in the stanzas written in dejection near Naples, the presentation of nature as the poet's own emotional feelings in the background and reflects the poet's personal feelings. But in the cloud, we do not find that human association. Shelley loved the physical beauty of nature and could be as sensuous as kids. Edmund Blunden says, had he done no more for us than sing of his skylark and cloud, his dancing stars and daedal earth, we should have been his debtors for brightness in the sky and elixir in the rain. His pictures of nature are often colorful. In Adonis, we come across this colorful picture. I quote, and the green lizard and the golden snake, like unprisoned flames out of their trance awake. I unquote. The dazzling colors of natural scenes and sights are noticed in the sensitive plant. I quote, the snowdrop and then violet arose from the ground which warm rain wet, and their breath was mixed with fresh color scent from the turf like the voice and the instrument, and the jasmine faint and the sweet tuberose, the sweetest flower for scent that blows, and all rare blossoms from every clime grew in that garden in perfect prime. I unquote. Keats an abandonment of the senses in his evocation of the island where the air is so heavy with the scent of lemon flowers and of violets and jonquils that you might faint with their delicious pain. So Keats's sensuousness we can compare here with Shelley's sensuousness towards nature. The vagueness of Shelley's descriptions does not imply that he lacked the faculty of accurate observation. He has been described as a Newton among poets by Carl Grabo, and many of his epithets and images of the cloud scenery are now shown to have been drawn from the scientific accounts, old and new. A. Brooke says that in the cloud there is not one phase, not one adjective, not one phrase, not one adjective which is contrary of or which does not illuminate natural fact. Shelley's keen and accurate observation of natural phenomenon is to be noticed in the following lines from the cloud. I quote, as the dissolving warmth of dawn may fold a half unfrozen dough globe, green and gold and crystalline till it becomes winged mist and wanders up the vault of the blue day, our outlines the moon and on the sun's last ray hangs over the sea a fleece of fire and amethyst. I unquote. Professor Grabo argues that Erasmus Darwin, the author of The Botanic Garden, was an important source of his attempts to synthesize science and metaphysics. His scientific interest extended into the realms of astronomy, electricity, and chemistry. His particular interest in electricity, meteorology, and optics may well account for what seems on the surface to be an abstract approach to nature, whereas Keats glorifies in the colors and rich textures of flowers and fruit. Shelley turns more often to look at the subtle aspects of light and shadow, skies and weather. Typically, the hymn to intellectual beauty conceives the spirit of beauty in terms of summer winds, moonbeam, rainbows, mountain mist, clouds, and the hues and harmony of evening. Shelley, like Wordsworth, holds a spirit permeates the objects of nature. His nature poetry is conceived in the sense that one universal spirit is present in nature. This spirit of nature is one and indivisible, but it expresses itself in various worldly forms. Every object in nature shares in this universal spirit and is made one with it again after its earthly existence comes to an end. This is pantheism, that all nature is the expression of one universal spirit. Thus, in Adonis, we find that kids becomes, I quote, a portion of the loveliness which once he made more lovely, I unquote. Shelley views these spirit sometimes as the spirits of beauty, sometimes the spirit of delight, but more commonly as the spirit of love. In Adonis, he tells us that this spirit of love, I quote, wields the world with never wearied love, sustains its beneath, and kindles it from above. I unquote. He thus affects a fusion of Platonic philosophy of love with the doctrine of pantheism. The sensuous objects of nature are the external manifestations of this universal spirit. The universal spirit imports beauty, loveliness, and light to sensuous objects of nature. This is expressed in 43rd stanza of Adonis. I quote, the one spirit's plastic strays sweeps through the dull, dense world, compelling there, I unquote, all new successions of the forms they wear. I unquote again, torturing the unwilling dross that checks its flight to its own likeness as each mass may bear, and bursting in its beauty and its light, from trees and beasts and men into heaven's light. Nature to Shelley, as to Wordsworth, is interfused with a universal spirit. Whereas for Shelley, the spirit of nature is essentially the spirit of love. For Wordsworth, it is the spirit of wisdom and thought. I quote, wisdom and spirit of the universe, thou soul that art the eternity of thought, and givest to forms and images a breath and everlasting motion, his nature myths. I unquote. Shelley is a myth maker and takes delight in portraying nature through the medium of myths. In The Sensitive Plant, he creates the myth of winter, who like a giant tears the cataracts from the hill and hangs them to his girdle. I quote, for winter come, the wind his was whip. One choppy finger was on his lip. He had torn the characters from the hills, and they clanged at his girdle like manacles. I unquote. In Prometheus Unbound, the earth and the moon have been invested with a personality. The image of the moon is nature myth. Ever touch of the moon is mythical. Within the chariot, the moon is represented as a lady. I quote, sits a winged infant, white, its countenance like the whiteness of bright snow. Its plumes are as feathers of sunny frost. Its limbs gleam white through the wind flowing folds of its white robe, oof of ethereal pearl. I unquote. The cloud is a myth of cloud and also abounds in other myths. The cloud is accompanied by hosts of other impersonation of nature, the sanguine sunrise with its meteor eyes, the orbed maiden of the moon, the imprisoned giant of the thunder, the lightning which runs through the sky to find his love, all are touched into life, and there is not one phrase, not one adjective which is contradictory of or which does not illuminate natural fact. A noteworthy feature of Shelley's nature poetry is the use of natural objects as symbols. The cloud becomes a symbol of his belief in immortality. I change but cannot die. The skylark symbolizes Shelley's belief in human regeneration by the efforts of prophets. The west wind, which is both a destroyer and a preserver, is a symbol of poets' revolutionary fervor for shattering the old order and building anew on its shambles. It shows his faith in the future emancipation of mankind. In Adonis, Pansis symbolizes melancholy, which violets indicate modesty and innocence. The most frequently used symbols in Shelley's poetry are the cave, the river, and the boat, which bear Platonic or Neoplatonic connotations, as we find in Prometheus Unbound and the revolts of Islam. W.B. Yeats, in his essay on the philosophy of Shelley's poetry, interprets Shelley's attitude to nature as a profoundly mystical one, part of what Yeats calls the great memory that renews the world and men's thoughts age after age. He sees the recurring images of the rivers and caves as ancient symbols from beyond his own mind, and the symbol which he finds the most important is that of a morning and evening star. To Shelley's mind, the central power of the world, representing the poet's longing for ideal perfection, the desire of the moth for the star, For Shelley, the natural world is alive with some animating principle or spirit. His descriptions of nature are rarely simple descriptions but are invested with meaning. The poet and the landscape are often fused, as in Ode to the West Wind, in which he seeks to become one with tempest. In Alastair, the isolation of the wandering poet is reflected in the loneliness of the countryside, and he becomes identified with it as the spirit of the wind. Shelley's treatment of nature is the scientific and philosophical, mythical as well as human. His poetry is one with nature in the sense that the skylark was a sprite or bird. Deserted by men, he rejoices in nature, but nature of spiritual kind, which he peoples with phantoms and airy beings. I quote, I love all that you loved, spirit of delight, the fresh earth in new leaves dress, and the starry night, autumn evening and the morn when the golden mists are born. I love snow and all the forms of the radiant frost. I love waves and winds and storms, everything almost which is nature's and may be untainted by man's misery. That was all about Shelley as a poet of nature, or the Shelley's treatment of nature in his poetry. Thanks, friends.